so happy to have this opportunity to speak with Marko Mikkilä. And Marko, can you tell me how you are feeling today? And you're in Finland. Can you give me an idea of what the weather is like for you today?
Well, today it's really sunny, as you maybe can see from the reflection. The sun is straight in front of me. I covered the window with the curtain, but still it's shining really brightly.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful sunny day in the winter wonderland. Yeah.
You said you got a fresh dumping of snow as well, which you made mention is unusual for this time in December.
Yeah. During the last years, it hasn't been so common. When I was a kid, it was still common that we had snow cover already in November. But now sometimes it comes only in January. But now we have it already at the end of November. So and that makes it a lot more pleasant to endure these dark months, because then it's not so dark simply when the snow is reflecting the light. Yeah.
I recently had a chance to interview Magnus Appelberg. I have a
Yeah.
feeling Magnus is swimming today over there in Finland. Is that something that you could even contemplate that, or is that
Yeah.
something that you would do?
Yeah, I have tried it. Well, Magnus, I guess, does it every day, as far as I understand.
Yeah.
I know all these Finnish people that you have interviewed, because Finland is very small, so we all know each other's. But yeah, uh, I have tried. We have a long tradition in Finland of winter swimming, meaning that we go to sauna, which is by the sea or by the lake, and we have made a hole in the ice, and we go to sauna, then we dip in the water, then we go to the sauna, and it's really an ecstatic feeling after the dipping into ice cold water and go to the sauna. It's one of the most pleasant, comfortable feelings you can have in life. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That sounds so
Yeah.
cool. Can you tell me, Marco, a little bit about your background in yoga? How did you first get interested in yoga practice or yoga philosophy?
Yeah. Um, well, when I was in my 20s, I started doing Japanese martial arts. First, I did Japanese martial arts, then Chinese martial arts. And during that time, during those 10 years, I got also interested in Eastern philosophy, initially like Taoism and Zen Buddhism. So I dabbled a bit in those first. And then when I was doing these Chinese martial arts, I started more and more concentrate on the so-called internal practices, because they usually divide Chinese martial arts into external and internal. So I started to do more and more of these so-called internal, like Tai Chi and similar practices, Qigong, and started reading more and more about philosophy, about also some New Age stuff. But then I decided to try yoga. Well, first I actually did it from a book. I had this book on the 5 Tibetan rites, which is like Tibetan yoga, and I did those for a while in the mornings, and they felt good. And then one friend of mine, asked in 2001 that would I like to join him and go to Ashtanga yoga beginners course, like a weekend beginners course. And I said, okay, I can join you. And I went there, and already the first evening I felt very good in my body, so that's why I decided to uh, experiment a bit more with yoga. Yeah.
Nice. And did you continue down the Ashtanga track or?
Yeah. First it was that. So I started doing like the Ashtanga practice first, like 3 or 4 times a week, as a side gig to the martial arts practices that I was doing.
Hmm.
But then after half a year of doing it, I felt like something is shifting in me that I wanted more to experiment more with. And I decided to stop the martial arts and only start doing the Ashtanga practice in the mornings, 6 days a week, like it's
Uh-huh.
prescribed.
Yes.
And and then a few years later, I started teaching it, and at one point I was running my own studio, or I owned the studio with two other people, so we were running it together, a studio in Turku, which is a town on the west coast of Finland, but now I live in Helsinki.
Got it. How many
Yeah,
years did you have your studio? Is it
sorry.
Turku? Is that how you say
Yeah,
it?
Turku. Yeah.
Turku. How long did
How
you
many
have your
years?
studio? Mm-hmm.
Around 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Yes. That's a solid,
uh,
that's a solid stint. Good job. And then
yeah. Oh, was it? No, no. Sorry. I think I a bit less, because then I moved to in 17, no, 18. I moved to Helsinki in
mm,
2018. So maybe I had my own studio only a bit more than 10 years. But then when I moved to Helsinki, I continued teaching professionally, but I was working for other studios. So yeah, I taught Ashtanga yoga professionally about 15 years, but was running my own studio only like a bit more than 10 years. Yeah.
I understand. Amazing. Do you still practice daily Ashtanga? Has your yoga and meditation practices changed, shifted, or evolved?
Yeah, I don't do the Ashtanga practice as such anymore. I used to go to Mysore for 12 years annually, and I was like
Wow. Oh,
in
wow.
the
Yeah.
part of the subculture of those people who go to India annually.
Yes.
Uh, and but then at some point I realized that doing the Ashtanga practice as it's prescribed, something about it is not working for me anymore. And I realized, like hindsight, that that has been the case already for years. But when you're doing it for your living, as you're living, and you're part of this like subculture, it's not always so easy to realize these kind of things, that maybe this is actually not working for me anymore. More and how I realized it or noticed it was that the practice as such was creating too much like rajasic energy, or in Western terms, it was like agitating my nervous system. Often, I really felt it quite palpably after the practices, that this is not really working for me anymore. And then I started trying other things, like I, for example, tried this. There is this tantric yoga tradition, not like neo. I want to right away make a distinction between so-called neo tantra and classical tantra, and this comes from classical tantra. There's this quite popular yoga brand in Finland called Shakta Yoga. I don't know how big it is in other places, or do you have at all it in USA? But they had like this offer that for 27 euros you could go to their classes for 2 weeks unlimitedly. So I that was the first COVID summer, so I think it was summer 20. So I decided to try that, and in that they also have set sequences, but they always after 1 to 5 poses they do around 10 breath resting pose in between. And for me, it just felt really good, these resting poses in between. I was like, wow, this feels good. And then I started experimenting with Ashtanga, that I did my normal practice. And after 1 to 5 poses, I did some kind of resting pose, either lying down or just squatting down, or any pose where you can really relax. And it sort of like took the edge off the practice, in the sense that which has, I mean, the edge that had been creating this
Mm,
nervous agitation that I didn't appreciate so much. So it seemed to work for me to start doing those resting poses. And yeah. So at that point I sort of like stopped doing the prescribed Ashtanga practice, and then I got to know this a guy called Jani Jaatinen, who is this. He's actually originally a student of Janne, who you interviewed. He's this extreme asana guy, and he teaches a bit similar sequence to Ashtanga practice, but there you can first of all, you always do every angle like in Ashtanga we do in primary series is mainly forward bends, and in the second series, intermediate series, it's lots of back bends and hip openers. But in this practice that this Jani was teaching, we do always like forward bend, side bend, twist, extension of the spine, and back bend, first standing up and then as a seated posture. And but we move in the same way with the flow of the vinyasa, with the flow of the breath. So we move in a similar manner as in Ashtanga, and that seemed to work for me better. So it doesn't create, when I do it like this way, so that I do every angle and every direction in every practice, it doesn't create this nervous agitation in me. So that's how I've been mainly practicing for the last 2-3 years. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, first of all, I love that you dedicated so much time every year. You went every year to India, it sounds like, for
Yeah,
10 to
for 12 years, I went
12,
usually for 2 months, sometimes only for 1 month. Yeah.
and that's a serious commitment. That takes a lot of commitment. And
Yeah.
then, but sometimes it's even harder to evolve and shift and change once having set such a solid pattern.
Mm.
I love
Yeah.
hearing that were open to exploring, and that
Yeah.
you've practiced research, you've
Yeah.
researched to figure out what actually works for me.
Yeah.
Amazing. Highly
And that,
recommended. Yes.
yeah, it is highly recommended. And also, what also affected me was that I was all the time also researching like the history of yoga, how it has been really practiced in the pre-modern times, and the concept of for whom and when is really central in pre-modern yoga, meaning that the the practice is supposed to be always altered according to the situation of the person, the
Practitioner.
what kind of phase of life you're going through, what kind of stage of life you're going through, because any single practice, whichever practice you take, it's not going to work for everybody in every stage of their lives. All the practices only work for certain people at a certain stage, and no practice should be done in the same way throughout your whole life. That's how I have understood it from the pre-modern yoga practice. So it was always altered according to the situation, and so I also adopted this like idea that you have to be always open to change your practice, not in the way that you always go with every whim, but you have to really feel into yourself and really feel, is this practice really working for me in the way I want? So nowadays I actually like saying about the Ashtanga practice that the first 10 years I think it was more beneficial than harmful, but the last 10 years I would say that it was more harmful than beneficial for me.
Yes. I understand fully. I understand. And I appreciate you bringing it into the vocal sphere. Can you tell me as well, Marko, what your academia history is, and or where you are currently landing in your journey with academia?
Yeah, well, I'm a PhD student in the Turku University, in the university of the town where I used to live. I've been a PhD student now for around 5 years. I have done all the other PhD student of philosophy, so like mainly Western philosophy. But I try to bring ideas from the East into the work that I do. So I like try to combine Western and Eastern, and especially Indian ideas. Um,
Wow.
so I have done all the other studies for my PhD apart from um, the work, so like the monograph itself. So I should write a monograph, a book on something, and that I haven't done yet. And I'm applying for funding around 8 times a year, and probably until I find funding, I probably will not really start writing the book, because at the moment work a normal full-time job, so I don't really have time to. So I try to read something on the topic all the time, but I don't really have the time to seriously investigate stuff at the moment. Yeah.
Wow. Can you tell me what your day job is?
At the moment, for the last 1.5 years, I've been working at the refugee center as a social counselor. So when the Ukraine war started, lots of Ukrainian refugees came to Finland, and they had to open the Finnish immigration office had to open lots of new refugee centers, and so they needed more staff. So I started also working in that field in Vantaa, which is where we have the international airport here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What is that like? That's got to be fairly challenging in terms of the heartbreaking element of anytime people are forced to leave their home. I'm
Yeah,
imagining you're encountering a fair amount of stress and nervousness about the future. Can you tell me a
yeah.
little bit about what that experience is like for you working in that environment?
Yeah, it is of course interesting when you also have this yoga background and you try to sort of like bring yoga into everyday life. So it's a very, in that sense, it's a fruitful place to work because you meet people all the time who are in dire situations and try to meet them on their level and sort of like uh, see the see that they are exactly like I am deep down, although I have been a bit more lucky in life, meaning that
Mhm.
I don't have to live in a war area,
Yes.
at least not yet in this life. Yeah.
Well, not yet. Well, actually, on that note, I mean, I want to be very respectful of your ideals and thoughts around this. But Finland obviously is very close to Russia.
Yeah.
What is the general feeling for you and or for your other friends in Finland regarding the current war in Ukraine?
Well, I think it has people have had lots of like mental stress because of it. Because, for example, I also have grandparents who really were in the war during the Second World War, and we had a war with Russia. So, for example, my own grandfather was a, a war captive and in a Russian concentration or Soviet concentration camp
Oh my God.
during the war. So and of course these things, although I haven't experienced them, but somehow uh, genetically, like when you think of epigenetics, you do inherit harsh experiences from your parents and from your grandparents. So I probably also have inherited some of his experiences from the concentration camp in some way. So many people in Finland have really had lots of mental stress because of this, because many of us has grandparents who were really in the war. So, and there was so many similarities with the Ukraine war and the Finnish war with Soviet in the 40s. Yeah.
Man, very interesting, and I love the thought of epigenetics when I think about my own family bloodline.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and you did bring up the word, the trauma and or like even if you don't realize why you might be being triggered, but having
Mm.
your grandfather and stories, and like you said, even if
Yeah.
maybe perhaps you've never even had contact with your grandfather, that you could potentially still feel that
Yeah.
through that experience. And then you made mention that when we spoke before we started this conversation, that one of the ideas that you would potentially seek funding for in
Yeah.
writing a book for your PhD
Yeah.
is around the realm of something that you called the non-dual movement, in which
Yeah.
I immediately thought like Vedantic
Mm.
philosophy and non-dualism there. Can you tell me a little bit what this is, what the non-dual movement is?
Yeah. Okay. So there has been different types of non-dual religious philosophies around the world uh, since at least since the Upanishads. Um, so the most famous, I guess, is Advaita Vedanta, Advaita itself meaning non-dual. But then there is also, for example, the philosophy that I have been involved with lately the most is the so-called tantric Advaita movement, or classical tantric Advaita Shaivism, which is also non-dual philosophy. But then also many strands of Buddhism are non-dual per se. And I guess also some Muslims, maybe Sufis. I don't know the Sufism so well, but I understand that they also are more or less like non-dual. And I guess also some, at least Christian mystics, they have a non-dual view of the world and of the life. So non-dual as such means just, or the word Advaita means not to. So it can come out in many ways, that either that you think that everything is made of one stuff, and usually in India the thought is that everything is actually consciousness, so that there is no matter. Matter doesn't even exist, but of course we experience something that we call matter, but there is no such thing as matter independent from consciousness. So that's one way of defining what like non-dual idealism would be, meaning idealism that a so-called consciousness-only view, that there is only consciousness at the end of the day, because all we can experience is consciousness, because we, by definition, cannot ever experience anything outside of our consciousness, but we are sort of like locked inside our conscious bubble, so to speak. But then also it can be analyzed, the word non-dual, in terms of subject-object, is that you can experience the subject and object so like merging together, or there not being a subject observing objects, but there is just perceiving happening, there is just seeing happening, hearing happening, smelling happening, feeling happening, sensing happening, but there is not actually a subject hearing or sensing a object. So that's sort of like one way to analyze or define what non-dual experience would mean. And then there's also in India, especially the sort of like the one way to talk about non-dualism is to talk about human beings, or the jivas, individual souls, so to speak, individual soul's relation to God, or the Almighty, or the Supreme Being. So either there is dualistic views where there is a Supreme Being that is separate from you. Then you have sort of like a dualistic theological view. But then you can also in non-dualism, it's more like that there is no separate Supreme Being, but we are ourselves fluctuations inside the Supreme Being. So that's also one way to talk about non-duality. So you can talk about it in terms of like metaphysics, that there's only one thing, consciousness, or the collapsing of the subject-object separation, or like in terms of your relation to a Supreme Being. Yeah. So okay, so that's the background. So these kind of views have always been, or not always, but at least as long as there has been like written history, there has been these kind of views in the world. But then in the 20th century, there were some Indian teachers, of whom I guess the most famous is Ramana Maharshi, who started like this way of teaching, that he started just teaching people by just sitting in their presence, sometimes just in silence, and sometimes answering their questions, so teaching by dialogue. And this Ramana Maharshi guy, he had experienced this like non-dual awakening, so he didn't experience himself as a separate being, separate self anymore. And then often people had awakening experiences just by sitting in his presence. And then some of his students started teaching, and that created this so-called non-dual movement, which is nowadays very vast in, for example, the YouTube. There are many so-called non-dual teachers in the YouTube. Some of them are very popular and famous. Some of them are not. I guess the most famous non-dual teacher would be Eckhart Tolle. He's also a non-dual teacher, so he's the most famous one. But then there are others like Rupert Spira, Adyashanti. Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you recognized non-dual philosophy in your own experience, having grown up in Finland and traveling to India? Did you have an aha moment, or did you hear perhaps like about this idea, and then maybe upon traveling to India had some sort of demonstration of somebody living according to the non-dual philosophy that your mind kind of open to, oh my gosh, that's a whole nother way of looking at the world?
Yeah, I think it has been gradual. I guess first it was just reading about it, and then when you were contemplating different worldviews, for me it was just always the most appealing was different versions of non-duality. So first I got to know Advaita Vedanta maybe, or initially maybe it was Zen Buddhism, and then Advaita Vedanta, and then later on this classical non-dual tantric view, Advaita Shaivism. So first it was just studying about it, and it just was the most compelling worldview. And then you started doing I started doing the practices that were recommended in those circles or in those philosophies, which are often practices like self-inquiry. You try to inquire into your own nature yourself, that what am I really? What is it that I'm really, the deepest down? What is my essence? And then it can be just sitting. That's one practice, just being aware of being aware, being aware of awareness as such. And when you do these kind of things long enough or often enough, then you might stumble on the realization that actually this is all there is, at least in my experience. And of course, there are often people have slight mystical experiences with these, but the mystical experiences themselves, they are not ever like the important events, but like the ultimate realization would be, the way I would describe it's like a non-phenomenal recognition of your
Mm.
of your own nature. So it's sort of like a paradigm shift in how you experience life, meaning that you try to be as often as possible in a state where you don't conceptualize things, but rather you just experience life without mental blabber, just as a seamless whole, so to speak. So everything in your experience being a seamless whole is one way to define non-duality. There are no borders between you and the world, so to speak.
Mm. How, so you've had the experience of teaching yoga in relation to, here's a sequence of asana, and in the realm of teaching a yoga class, and or that's a hatha yoga based class where you're practicing posture, you know, you
Yeah.
can learn something and then you can show somebody something, and it's, I don't want to say it's easy, but there's a structure that if you know what
Yeah.
you're doing, it's not hard
Yeah.
to teach if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Something like non-dual perspective, how do you teach that? Apart from what we're doing right now, I mean, I think obviously, like when you mentioned Brahmana Maharishi and his ability to just sit in the company of his students and, like you said, either practice silence or maybe answer questions, but it was through this dialogue process, which you said you also had done a lot of study in. And Western philosophy, such as like Socratic thinking. I'm guessing
mm,
you've dove
yeah,
into
yeah,
Socrates, and there's this idea of through dialogue we
mm,
can arrive at a place where there's understanding.
yeah,
But can you answer? I'm curious how this to me sounds like it would be a little more nuanced in
yeah,
educating or teaching about
yeah.
what type of skills do you formulate in the process of if you had this goal of I want to teach a student about
Mm,
non-dualism. Yeah.
mm, yeah. Well, it's often it's about giving like verbal pointers. Uh, of course, you can talk about the philosophy per se. That's one way to teach initially. It to talk about the philosophy. That this is a worldview that in non-duality people believe in. So you either buy it or you don't buy it, or you investigate it or you don't investigate it. But if it appeals to you, then you investigate it. And then if you sit with people who have had the like the personal non-phenomenal recognition or realization of their like essence nature, then they can from their own experience give like verbal pointers, which would be like for example one of the most simple one is just asking, are you aware? If I ask you, are you aware? What is your answer?
Mm, yes.
Yes, yeah, that's what everybody would answer if they understand the question. They first pause for a while and then they say, "Yes, I am aware." And then, uh,
I mean, I think I am.
no, you don't think you are. You are. You know you are because otherwise you wouldn't hear my voice if you weren't
Yes.
aware.
Yes.
You wouldn't
That's
feel your body if you weren't aware.
a
You
good
wouldn't
point.
see this computer if you weren't aware.
Yes.
Because all the perceptions can happen only within awareness. Um, but then you might start like identifying more and more just being the awareness, like the perceiver,
Mm. Yeah.
that which perceives. And one way to start like recognizing it as such is that you define it as it is something that doesn't change, it doesn't alter, it's just always there in your own experience. It's always there. There's one thing that is constant in your experience or any conscious being's experience. There is awareness. You're conscious. There is consciousness. uh, so that doesn't change, but everything else changes. Like we often hear this maxim that change is the only constant. And that refers to the phenomenal world, that in the phenomenal world, everything is always changing and nothing ever can stay the same. But from your experience, from your point of view, from your vantage point, there is something there, which we can call awareness for the lack of a better term, or consciousness for the lack of the better term. There is something there that is being aware or like um, testifying the existence of all the changes that are happening all the time.
Yes. That makes perfect sense. And I guess one question that does pop into my head, and you might have had some experience with this. I'd like to ask. I had a close relative that had Alzheimer's,
Yeah,
and the experience of watching that process,
yeah,
I really got this feeling of the fragility of the mind. Like when the mind,
mm,
like what you're speaking of, where I am aware,
mm,
and like you said, you answered, yeah, you are. When I
yeah,
second guess it, and I can conceptualize that. And what I noticed with Alzheimer's is there wasn't that clarity of
mm,
awareness or self-awareness even. And
mm,
what do you, I guess I know we can say it's a disease, like
mm,
a synaptic
yeah,
issue.
yeah.
What have you encountered with this in relation to your thoughts about because sometimes I've come across this idea that say in India that there's a very fine line. This isn't just in India, a very fine line
Yeah.
between spiritual awakening and madness, where there's this like enlightenment element, but then
Yeah.
if we were investigated, we might go somewhere and they might say you have some sort of psychiatric disorder. We need to lock you up. I don't know. What do you think in relation to what we're talking about with non-dualism when we investigate these transitions of the mind through the aging process?
Yeah. My only living grandparent actually also at the moment happens to have Alzheimer's. So I have also some personal experience of
Yeah.
testifying
You
somebody
have
going
you have
through.
seen and felt it. Yes.
Yeah, I have also seen it happening. But first of all, we have to make the distinction between awareness and mind, like it always has been made in India. So in European philosophy, it's not always clear that awareness or consciousness as such is different from mind. But like in yoga philosophy or Indian philosophy, mainly, there's a clear distinction between awareness and mind. So mind is part of the phenomenal world. So in mind, everything is also always changing, meaning also that you might go through diseases of the mind, and the mind starts, for example, falling apart. But even then, I would claim that even if you have Alzheimer's, there is a presence of awareness always, but they cannot necessarily verbalize it. They cannot necessarily talk about it, but there is, because one way to also define awareness as such is that you have some kind of experience. Always when you have some kind of experience, any kind of experience, however subtle or gross, you have awareness. So also I would claim that a person with an Alzheimer, they have also awareness all the time, but they cannot necessarily talk about it. They don't necessarily have memory, so they have a momentary awareness all the time, but they don't necessarily know what happened 5 minutes ago. But they have awareness now, but they don't necessarily remember this now anymore. But they
Yes.
all these, so there's, you could visualize it as a string of pearls, and every pearl would be like a now moment. And so there is always awareness in every moment, but you don't necessarily remember the previous moments. Yeah.
Great answer.
But so that's from the
Yeah.
um, uh, perspective of Alzheimer's. But then again, when you raised up this question of that sometimes there's a fine line between madness and enlightenment, so to speak. Well, here we have to also make the distinctions between mystical experiences and awakening or liberation. I myself don't usually use the word enlightenment because it's a Western term, and none of the Indian terms that were used about this awakening or liberation, they cannot really be translated by the word enlightenment. So
Good
I'm
point.
going to talk now with the terms awakening and liberation. So on the way to awakening, and after having your first awakening experiences, the awakening experiences can always deepen and deepen and deepen, maybe like infinitely deepen and deepen and deepen. And during those, you can have always like different types of mystical experiences during the. Some people are like prone to have mystical experiences. Some people have them more. Some people don't ever have mystical experiences, but they still can awaken. And it's these mystical experiences that are often bordering with some kind of madness, especially if the person doesn't have a doesn't have like a framework where to put, like a philosophical framework where to put these mystical experiences, then it can go even into schizophrenia or something like that. But if you have the philosophical framework, you then can understand that, okay, these are just mystical experiences, and they also always will change. So there is no not any experience that we can have that is constant, but every experience as such is changing. And also mystical experiences, they come and go, just like all the other mundane experiences, like me being hungry and then me not being hungry, me being sleepy and then not me being sleepy, me seeing some specific color and then not seeing specific color anymore.
That is really interesting. That puts the mystical experience into the realm of the material, almost like the phenomenal world that is constantly changing.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a really good distinction right there. I like that you also brought up that if you have a philosophical framework from which to then filter and or process or maybe make sense of what just happened. So then obviously you're a big fan of how important, and I know it's probably a very obvious statement, of how important philosophy is.
Yeah. One of the functions of philosophy is to first of all give you like a goal, why you are practicing for. So they set these goals, so to speak, but they also give you understanding, because when you do for example yoga or meditation practices like Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, in the third chapter of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, he talks a lot about these different types of samyama experiences, different kind of mystical experiences or parapsychological experiences that you can have. And if you don't have like the understanding that these kind of things can happen, then you can really freak out if something all of a sudden happens to you that the Western materialistic science cannot explain to you. So it is that I think also that's the reason why Patanjali spends so much time with these experiences in the third chapter, because he wants to warn people that these kind of things can happen, not necessarily, but these kind of things can happen, so be aware.
Interesting. You made mention that you can almost classify some people are a little more prone toward having a mystical experience, and some of us are not prone, although we can have still an awakening regardless of whether we're prone or not. And I know it's a little taboo to even talk about this. I guess I don't know if it's taboo or not. Maybe it is. Do you have mystical experiences? Are you prone to the mystical experience, or do you often watch people and go, I wonder why they're? I've never had that. Interesting. You know, like where would you put yourself?
Well, I'm not especially prone, but I have had some subtle experience, because mystical experiences, that they can be really like worldview altering just in one go, a bit like for example when if you would be under like a psychedelic, they can often alter your worldview in one go, and that's also a mystical experience that you have under the influence of a psychedelic. But then there are also more subtle and more common, more normal mystical experiences that almost everybody has. Like for example, we sometimes, or it's really common that people, for example, when the phone rings, that people know who is calling before they look at the phone. That's also a mystical experience, because there's some kind of telepathic connection then with that person. So these kind of experiences are really common.
Yes.
Or knowing sometimes in advance something is going to happen, a so-called precognition, that you know in advance, or you feel it in your body in advance that something is going to happen. That's also a mystical experience. Or, for example, one of my most memorable experiences that I would call a mystical experience is when I went to Rishikesh for the first time in my life. I had already gone to Mysore many times, but then it was maybe my sixth or seventh travel to India. I decided, okay, let's explore a bit the north also. And I went with a friend to Rishikesh. We first landed in Delhi and then took a cab drive to Rishikesh. And then we saw the Ganga River, the river Ganges, for the first time. And we went and I had been like always, usually just before I went to India, I had to do a lot of work at my yoga studio. I had to do a lot of work just before going. So I was always a bit stressed when I went to India. And I remember that time also I had a lot of stress on my mind. Still, when I landed in India, and then we went with my friend after taking our stuff to the hotel. We went to the river Ganges, and then we rolled up our sleeves from our pants and walked into the Ganges, and all the stress was gone. My mind went like blank, silent for minutes on end, and I was just, wow,
yeah,
this is awesome.
yeah.
And that was a mystical experience also, that the stress just goes in 1 second. And why did it happen when I stepped into the river Ganges? I don't know, but something interesting happened there. Yeah.
I like the way that you're explaining real time experiences, because I think often when we embark upon yoga, studying yoga philosophy, there's this, like something far off in the distance idea that maybe if I keep with my practices, I will attain this sort of elusive but really intriguing idea of being awakened. But I like that you're bringing it into a momentary awareness of like, and I think like probably it wouldn't matter if I went to the Ganges River and uh, India, or if I was in Finland and I decided to do an ice bath and sauna today. But like you said, like whereas you feel a shift in your body, you're aware that all of this stress has just departed, or that you had a change, a shift, that you're clumping that into, or putting that into the idea or the category of a mystical experience. Because when you say it like that, I can think of maybe a lot of mystical experiences that are happening all day, every day. Like that makes me think a little more like, even right now, to be able to talk to you on the computer through some amazing form of technology that just, we're on the other sides of the world, and here we are having this conversation. I mean, so I appreciate that. And I think I'm getting a little bit more of a glimpse of what you're pointing at in relation to this concept or this philosophy. How does non-dualism then apply to, say, people that are processing trauma? And is there a way to utilize these ideas to heal?
Yeah. One more thing about the mystical experience and awakening, or the distinction between them. So I want to still make clear that when I made the distinction, or said that some people are not prone to mystical experiences, it still doesn't take anything away from their ability to, or their potential to awaken to their true nature. So because the awakening itself to their essence nature is not in the same sense, it's not a mystical experience, because it's not really it's not an experience in the sense that it comes and goes, or it's not an experience in the sense that it's bound to always come and go, but it's rather a paradigm shift that can become permanent for you. So you can start experience. So usually it doesn't come in one go, a permanent experience for you, experience difficulties with language, but it doesn't usually come usually right away a permanent non-phenomenal recognition for you, but it can become. So in that sense, it's not an experience. If we define experience, something that comes and goes, like in your perceptions, or as thoughts in your mind, or as feelings or emotions. So yeah, that distinction I wanted to make. But then your question about the trauma. Well, what happens when people, so to speak, awaken to their essence nature is that they stop bit by bit, more and more, they stop identifying with their body mind. And of course, trauma is something in the body mind. And when you're not identified with the body mind, you're not identified with the trauma either anymore. So you don't necessarily hold on to you're not um, um, holding on to or clinging to the trauma. And of course, it doesn't mean that then right away all your trauma is just gone, but it makes it easier for you to start working in different kinds of therapeutic modalities, with different kind of therapeutic modalities with the trauma. And then when you, if you, for example, um, have like flashbacks of traumatic experiences, you can stay as an let's say aloof observer of those experiences and just let them go through you, meaning that you don't try to push them away, or you don't try to suppress them, or you don't freak out because of them, but you realize also the flashbacks of traumatic experiences, that they are also just experiences that come and go, meaning that you can just let them move through you and try to experience them as raw as possible, as raw sensations without the story. Because what also happens with awakening, that your mind is not like your mind is not confabulating stories all the time. So when you have any kind of feeling or emotion or sensation, if you can let go of the story, then you can also let go faster of the sensation or feeling or emotion which is uncomfortable for you.
Yes, that makes great sense. You're making it sound so simple. I like it. Because
Yeah,
sometimes
but it's of course not, it's not, or some people put it this way, that it's not necessarily easy, but it can be simple. It can be simple in the way that when you learn to just be the aware presence, then it is just observing what is going through you, and you don't have to. You can still have really uncomfortable feelings, so it's not easy in that sense, but in a way, it's simple.
yeah. I love the analogy that you used earlier regarding when we were speaking about, say, memory dysfunction, that there's a now moment, a now moment, a now moment, as if they are a bead with a thread moving through it. So there's some continuity. And
Yeah.
and then just there's just the non-awareness of the previous now moment. And when you're making mention of mystical experiences and the awakened mind, I wonder if, say, like we have 10 beads in a row, and the first bead is an awakening experience, or a mystical experience that we experience for whatever that duration of time would be. And then the second bead, third bead, fourth bead isn't. I'm back in that mind of like, I'm worried, I'm stressed, I'm freaking
Yeah.
out. And then the fifth bead is, oh, an awakened moment. And then, and so there's a little bit of space in between. Is it, because I know we have to be like aware of, like, when I set a goal, if I think I'm striving for something in the future, I'm missing being in the moment sometimes and just experiencing what is now. Is there, would you say, in the non-dual philosophy that we're speaking about, is it our goal to try to make not only the first bead an awakened experience, but also the second and the third and the fourth?
Yeah.
And eventually
Yeah.
all those moments are
Yeah.
all one continuous
Yeah.
state of being awake.
Yeah. So yeah, that could be said to be the goal, that awakening or being in the awake state, meaning that you so like identify with your essence nature or the consciousness as such. That is the goal, and usually it happens so that you first have like a short shift into that kind of state, and then if you keep at it, you start having longer and longer shifts into that state until it at some point becomes permanent, and then that I would call liberation. So I would also make the distinction between awakening and different like depths of awakening, and then a liberation is when you never ever think that what you are is the body mind,
Mm.
but instead you always, even if you go however horrible experiences through your body mind is going, you still don't identify with the body, because usually, of course, if we feel pain, we right away identify with the body. Oh, there's pain, I want to get rid of it. And usually of the uncomfortable feelings we want to get rid of, and of the pleasant experiences we want more of those. But I guess a permanently awake person, which I definitely am not, they don't, and also Patanjali talks about this, that for them it doesn't really matter is the experience pleasant or unpleasant, they just take it as it comes. So they stop preferring chocolate to carrots, so to speak. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So there are some
yes.
There are some examples of, like, one of the teachers, non-dual teachers that I have encountered online lately is this woman called Kiran Trace, and apparently she had, like, as I don't know the details of her past, but she has said that it is as traumatic as it can be, but she don't want to tell the details because she don't want people to, like, dwell over the details of her horrible past. But she apparently don't anymore feel the trauma at all, and for her, like, also to, for example, Eckhart Tolle, it happened without any spiritual interest, without any so-called spiritual practices. So for some people, the awakening can happen without practice, and then usually when it happens without practice, then they usually, because they first don't understand what the heck is going on with them, they start reading philosophy, for example, Indian philosophy or Eastern philosophy or Christian mystical philosophy, and they learn, okay, there are also other people who have experienced these kind of things, so this is what I'm going through, and then they either start teaching or don't start teaching. So there are also apparently lots of awakened beings nowadays who don't teach or don't want to teach. They just live their normal life doing whatever they do, and yeah.
Yes. Do you think it was your initial foray into philosophy and yoga and meditation? Did you have a mystical experience first that then caused you to want to do the study that you've done and the research that you've done? Or
No. I think for me it was usually people, when they start doing these so-called spiritual practices, they either are unhappy with themselves. I was unhappy with myself and I wanted change, or they want mystical experiences, or they want power over others. I mean, in the tantric traditions, there's actually a prayer that you should say every day, that I want to do my practice for the truth of being, out of love for myself, and for the benefit for all beings. Because usually always people start on the spiritual journey because they are unhappy with themselves, they even hate themselves, and of course yogic practices can help with that, but it's not like that's not what they are designed for initially. Or then people just want mystical experiences, which Chogyam Trungpa, the famous Tibetan Buddhist teacher, called famously spiritual materialism. So that's also a form of materialism, that you just want new experiences, always new experiences. But then you get so, like, stuck with new experiences, and it's not really any different from getting new experiences through drugs or any other sensual means. Or then people, often we have these sad examples in the yoga and meditation world where a bit narcissistic people become gurus, and then they start abusing people. So often, sometimes people start the yoga practice or meditation practice because they want influence over others. But yeah, so that's why in the tantric tradition we do this prayer, that let me not falter into those three categories, but let me be freed of them and just do this because I love myself, because I want to know the truth of existence, and because I want to do this for the benefit of all beings. So for me, it was definitely that I was just super unhappy with myself. I was like socially awkward and prone to depression and stuff like that, and I just wanted to change. That's why I started to do yoga, and I did change. Yeah.
Very cool, Marko. I I love this discussion. I know to stay on time with you, I first I know this could take us down a whole nother long conversation, so maybe I'll have to save it for the next time. But I'm on the
Yeah.
last chapter of Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Trongyon Trungpa, and I'm really
Yeah.
enjoying it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, because I know folks that were studying with him at Naropa in Colorado back in the 70s or in 80s, that then upon hearing about how his power kind of got
Yeah.
misused, as I'm
Yeah.
reading it, I'm finding like, wow, what an incredibly gifted teacher. And at the same time, I'm going, but how and why
Yeah.
did he falter in that direction? And
Yeah.
I don't think that we have to answer that or try to figure that out right now. But
Yeah.
earlier in our conversation, I was about to bring that book up because I wanted to ask you something about that. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad you did. Maybe that was a mystical experience there. We had some sort of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but
I actually
tell
uh,
me, tell me.
I'm not in a rush at the moment, so if you have time, we can still go on for another 20 minutes or so. But why it happens to some people that when they start getting power over other people, they start abusing other people, is that when you get the awakening or the awakening experience as such, that's not the most difficult part of the liberation process or the yogic process, but the most difficult part is integrating the awakening experiences of your or the recognition of your essence nation, integrating it to all spheres of your life. So what happens is that with many teachers, they often have mystical experiences or paradigm shifts as awakenings, but then uh, they fail to integrate that to all spheres of their life, and and they, for example, become attached to, for example, the power that they have over others, and that also happen in the
So,
Ashtanga community, as we
yes.
unfortunately learned during the Me Too movement. But yeah.
Were you in your process of studying in India with Patabi Joyce over all those years? Did you witness, was it obvious to you that there was some misuse of power?
Well, I actually started going there quite late. So the first time I went to India was it 2007? But it was the last year that Patabi Joyce was actively teaching. So I was there in January, I think it was 2007 or 8. And then soon after that, in March, he fell seriously ill and never really recovered. So that was the last winter that he was really in the Shala teaching. And the next year it was then Sharat who was actually had taken over. He was still alive. Patabi was still alive, but he wasn't teaching anymore. I saw him. And 2 years after the second, I mean, the third time I went to India, he was still alive, and I saw him maybe once in a conference and once in the office, but he didn't say anything. And then he died quite soon after that. But
Yes.
I did, because the only time that I was with him in the Shala there was during the time when they already had the big Shala. So there was like, 70 people at the same time in the Shala.
Yes.
Um, so I didn't really see anything myself. Uh, so yeah, I can't say that I saw anything. But of course, I did see I did find, for well, I did see one thing when well, actually, the first time I met him was in Helsinki half a year before I went to India. So his last tour in Europe happened the summer before I went for the first time to Mysore, and I practiced with him in Helsinki for 1 week. And it was only led classes, and always after the led class, some people queued up and they went to thank him, either touched his feet or gave him a kiss. And what I then noticed was that when he was kissing the women on the mouth, he often also patted their behind, which of course teachers usually don't do. For example, in university, I have never seen a teacher patting their students on their behind.
Yes.
So I found that a bit odd. Yeah.
Yeah. Understood. I hear you, man. I hear you. Well, that's good insight. That thought crosses my mind a lot, and I appreciate the way you explain that. I think that does make sense. Man, I really enjoy this.
Thank you. Me too.
I really enjoy I enjoy having this opportunity to speak with you, Marko, and hearing your perspective. And I'm so thankful to Frank for introducing me to you. And I'm having such a great time meeting Finns.
Now you're stuck in this Finnish loop because you always ask them to recommend something somebody, and they always recommend some other Finn. So I might recommend some other person now. I'm just gonna recommend a Finn. Yeah. I want you to get out of this Finnish loop.
I'll take it. I mean, the process of finding folks to interview, yeah, I mean, I love it. I enjoy it, and I love having conversation, having never really met each other, have any. It just comes out of faith and trust. You know, that you know, we both enjoy yoga and have had some practice in it, and let's just see what you've learned, you know, and what you've come across. So I think it's an incredible. I mean, I really enjoy this, Marko. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day here. And
thank you.
I would like
we have a holiday because usually at this time I'm at work. But we have a holiday because we have the Finnish Independence Day. So Finland turned today 106 years old. So that's why I'm at home at this time. But
yeah, congratulations. How will you celebrate? Is there anything like?
No, this is my celebration, having this discussion. Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
cool, man. All right. Well, I really appreciate this so much, and you know, it's funny because let me just be really honest here. I would like to schedule these podcasts to be like 2 hours, 3 hours, because you know, you just get down the track and and then we break through this, you know, okay, I trust you and I feel like you're trusting me, and so it's okay, and we can chat. And then I have listeners who sometimes they go, Todd, like when I see that the podcast is over an hour, I go, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And I recently had one and then I released one recently that was an hour and a half. And so one of our listeners told me, she goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe, like I saw it and I was like, he's killing me. Like, what is he doing? He's making this for long. And then she was like, it was so fascinating. I loved every minute of it. Like, and so she was laughing at herself just for having that, all the stuff our mind does, you know, all this, like how am I going to do this? How will I make it through? And then, so I'm trying to stick to the 1 hour format just because like, you know, nowadays with modern social media and stuff, it's like you have 30 seconds or you have 60 seconds to make your point, to make your claim.
That's actually, of course, if you're doing just like, if you're just, for example, advertising something, then it's often very short attention span that people have. But if people really put the time aside to, for example, listen to a podcast or watch a podcast, if the topic is interesting, I think we shouldn't underestimate people. They can still concentrate on stuff for a long time. For example, isn't the most popular podcast in the world Joe Rogan Experience, and his podcasts are often 3 hours long, and people watch them. Hundreds of millions of people watch them. You know,
you're right. You're right. Well, maybe I think you're giving me a good suggestion here. How about, Marko, maybe on the next, if you're open to doing this again, let's go for a marathon. Let's do that. Let's take the 3 hour journey.
Yes.
All right. So all of you listening, the next time you see Marko on the podcast, you know,
put the day aside.
It's a course. It'll be
save the date. And I mean the whole day.
All right. Deal, my friend. It's on. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Marko. I really appreciate it. Let's do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you.